Hello everyone.
Hi there. Welcome back to our book discussion on Telescola. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Darrell.
And I am Miss Makam.
Today we're talking about Good Wives, aren't we?
Yes, by Louisa May Alcott.
We'll maybe find out what makes a good wife, according to Louisa.
Yeah, so Good Wives follows the life of four March sisters who live in genteel poverty in 19th century United States.
Genteel poverty, so meaning they're not completely poor, they're just kind of stable at the poor level.
Can we say like medium class, like
just below? Just below. Yeah. And the genre for the book is sentimental. It's a sentimental novel, the coming-of-age story of these four sisters.
Very nice. But Mr. Darrell, as usual, we will start our today's program with an introduction. So, firstly, we will talk and introduce you to new vocabulary. After that, we will talk about the author of the book. Later, we'll tell you shortly what is the story about, the summary of the book.
From there, we move to the characters. They are, of course, the way the story moves forward. And we have to look at the setting as well, the when, the where of the story, to understand it better. And from there, we can finally start looking at main themes.
Yeah, sure. And finally, we'll give you an interesting homework.
I'm looking forward to the question.
Of course.
Let's move over to the vocabulary.
What is our next word? Not next, sorry. The first word.
The first word, to neglect. It's a verb, and it's to neglect. This is when you pay no attention to, or little attention, to someone and you kind of ignore them.
უგულებელყოფა. ყურადღების არ მიქცევა.
Our next word is duty. That's the pronunciation, duty. It's a noun, something that one is expected to do or by moral or legal obligation.
მოვალეობა, ვალდებულება.
Our next word is effort. Effort, the exertion of physical or mental power to do something.
ძალისხმევა.
Our next word is fever. Fever, it's an abnormal condition of the body characterized by high temperatures, quickening of the pulse, and disturbance of various body functions.
Yeah, and it is very dangerous during pandemic. In Georgian, ციებ-ცხელება.
Our next noun is governess. Governess, a woman who is employed to take charge of a child's education, upbringing, and so on.
აღმზრდელი ქალი.
Our next verb is to escape. To escape. To get away from some situation, whether you've been confined or restrained.
გაქცევა, თავის არიდება.
Our next word is to persuade. To persuade. It's to prevail on someone to do something, to convince them somehow to do what you want them to.
Yeah, დარწმუნება, დაჯერება.
Our last word is to suspect. To suspect, to believe someone to be guilty or false or counterfeit, undesirable, bad, defective.
ეჭვი, ვარაუდი.
That's it for words. Why don't we move to the author?
Yeah, that would be very interesting, and it's high time.
We have Louisa May Alcott, born in 1832 and died in 1888, so completely 19th century. She was an American novelist, short story writer, and a poet as well. And her best known work is Little Women. You might have seen a movie, probably. And the book we're talking about today is part 2 of Little Women, Good Wives.
Yeah, this movie is very popular, actually. So, raised in New England by her modern thinking parents, she grew up among many of the well-known intellectuals, such as, for example, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Alcott's family suffered from financial difficulties, and while she worked to support them, she also loved to write and then started writing.
So she began to receive critical success for her writings in 1860s. Early in her career, she sometimes used pen names such as, for example, A.M. Bernard, under which she wrote short stories and sensation novels for adults that focused on passion and revenge.
We've seen that before with many female writers in the 19th century. Pen names.
Yeah, maybe it's because of the gender thing.
Yeah, there was still an issue back then. So published in 1868, Little Women is set in the Alcott family home, Orchard House, in Concord, Massachusetts, a classic American town, and is loosely based on Alcott's childhood experiences with her three sisters, Abigail May Alcott, and Nerica, and Elizabeth Sewell Alcott.
Interesting. The novel was well received at that time and is still popular among children and adults. It has been adapted many times to the stage, film, and television.
Like certain other authors we've looked at from the 19th century, women authors, she was an abolitionist and a feminist and remained unmarried throughout her entire life. Abolitionist means she was against slavery, and feminist, you know. All her life she was active in reform movements such as temperance, which was to get people to stop drinking alcohol, and women's suffrage.
So she was quite against many different problems of that time.
She was very politically motivated.
Okay. Originally, however, Alcott did not really want to publish Little Women, claiming that it was boring. And she also told that she didn't know how to write girls because she didn't know any her sisters, her own sisters. However, encouraged by her editor, Thomas Niles, she wrote it within 10 weeks. Very urgent.
Very
quick.
Quick as well, yeah. She died from a stroke, like a brain problem, and 2 days after her father died. So she died 2 days after her father died in Boston in 1888. So we have a first question to the audience. Here it is. Louisa Alcott had a large philosophical and political influence over her life and ideas. Now, do you think this makes a writer better?
I don't think so. Writers can be equally powerful as writers of imaginary and fantastic stories. The styles are different, but the art is still the same.
Yeah, so basically he's saying, good answer. So you're saying it's not necessary to know too much philosophy or politics to write a good novel.
Of course, sure, and you can also have your own experiences, like read books, for example, and based on those material facts, you can have enough facts to write another novel. So now, Mr. Darrell, I think it is time to talk about the summary of the book. Good Wives takes off after about 3 years after where Little Women let off. So each girl is struggling with her own problems.
Let's summarize what each of the four girls were up to. So first off, for Meg, as you remember, she must learn to be a good wife and mother and juggle the demands of being a wife and mother.
Yeah, and Jo must learn how to maintain her morals in a corrupt business and rein in her headstrong and often very selfish nature.
Now the third sister, Beth, as you remember, she was a bit ill. She has to come to terms with the fact that she may never grow old, and she has to learn how to enjoy the time that she has left.
How interesting they are. And our next sister, Amy, must learn how to put other people first, and so that she should know that money and other fine things are nothing in comparison to a good heart and unconditional love.
So all four sisters have to make their way through life. They have to grow up a little bit. There's a lot of joy along the way, but there's also sorrow, heartache, and so on.
And in all things, they look to the quiet strength and wisdom of their mother, whose gentle reprimands and loving encouragement sees all of them through their trials. So their mother is a teacher for them, who shows the right ways, maybe.
Some kind of stability.
Exactly.
We can divide the story into 4 main parts. We'll do this extremely briefly. So first, there's the major conflict. And what's that? The March sisters struggle to improve their various flaws as they grow into adults. Jo dreams of becoming a great writer and does not want to become a conventional adult woman.
So the next stage is rising action. The sisters begin to mature. They meet Laurie, their next door neighbor, and Meg gets married. What about Jo? She turns down Laurie's proposal, like having a reason of independence. So she wanted to be independent. And this is also a very mature behavior because you can decide on your own.
Mm-hmm. And that was the climax of the story, like the high point, basically. And then the following action after that, so how the story comes down from that point to the end. Beth dies, Amy marries Laurie, Jo marries the professor, and Jo also founds a school for boys and puts her writing career on hold.
Very interesting family, very interesting sisters. Now, Mr. Darrell, it is time for the question. Right? So, with 4 characters, the sisters, to portray, do you think Louisa Alcott made her task too difficult?
Well, no, I don't think so, because she shows all the sisters as unique personalities, and each has place in the story.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but it takes a lot of skill to show 4 different characters and make them interesting.
Yeah, and I think lots of families with many siblings would relate themselves to these type of families.
Do you come from a large family?
No, I don't. I have only one brother, and it is a bit hard to imagine myself in a big family.
Well, let's move off to the characters now, and we'll start with Jo. Her name is Josephine March. She is the protagonist of the novel, and the second oldest March sister. Jo wants to be a writer, and is based on, of course, the writer, the author herself, who was the same way. And that makes this Jo kind of semi-autobiographical.
Yeah, and she is one of my favorite characters, I would say. And why? She has a temper and a quick tongue. So although she works very hard to control both, she stays a tomboy and reacts with impatience to the many limitations like placed on women and on girls like during her time.
She hates romance in her life and wants nothing more than to hold her family together. She's a family woman without being romantic.
Yeah, very interesting. Our next character is Meg March. So the oldest March sister, she battles her girlish weakness for luxury and money and ends up marrying a poor man. But she loves this poor man. She represents the conventional and good. She is similar to her mother, for whom she was named.
One slightly maybe negative thing about Meg, she lets other people choose for her. So she wants to please other people all the time. This might be one of the reasons why she lets her friends dress her up as a rich girl, so that she can convince other people that she's rich.
Yeah, and she also becomes a very agreeable woman, like very agreeable housewife, pretending to like politics because her husband does, and foregoing luxury because her husband is poor.
So she changes to the situation.
Or she pretends to change.
Well, let's move to the third sister, Beth March. Beth is very shy and quiet. She has a little bit of similarity to Meg and a little similarity to Jo. Like Meg, she always tries to please other people, and like Jo, she's trying to keep the family together. But Beth struggles with minor faults, like she resents doing housework.
Oh, so Beth actually resembles an old-fashioned character of the novels in 19th century, like English writers' novels, Charles Dickens's novels. Beth is a good person, but she is also too nice to survive in Alcott family, in Alcott's more realistic fictional world. With Beth's death, Alcott lets an old type of character die off. The three surviving March sisters are strong enough to live in the changing world and in different pace of life.
So it's like a commentary that the author's making. This Beth, although she likes Beth, is not strong enough to survive in the modern world.
Yes.
Okay, Beth is close to Joe, and neither of them wants to live in the world the way it is. Both of them kind of fail or just don't want to be like ordinary women.
Very interesting. Our next character is Emmy March, so the youngest March sister. Emmy is an artistic beauty who is good at manipulating other people. Maybe the beauty is the weapon.
Yeah, unlike Joe, Amy acts as a perfect lady because it pleases her and those around her. So it pleases her and everyone around her. That's an interesting character that she is. She gets what she wants in the end. Popularity, a trip to Europe, and marriage to Laurie.
Interesting. Amy serves exact opposite to Joe, who refused to submit to the conventions of ladyhood. But both artists struggle to balance society's expectations with their own natural inclinations.
Now that you brought up Joe, let's compare them slightly. Joe is more genuine, I think, and more generous. So Joe looks better compared to Amy. However, both are lovable and real for all their flaws.
And our next character, actually who starts changes in this family, is Laurie Lawrence. So this is the March's charming, fun, and intelligent next-door neighbor. Laurie becomes particularly close to this family, but ends up particularly close to Joe, but ends up marrying Amy. In between the publication of Part 1 and Part 2, Alcott received many letters asking her to marry Joe to Laurie. So the readers wanted them to be together.
But that didn't happen.
Of course, the writer's decision.
Well, perhaps simultaneously to please the readers and to teach them a lesson about life, the author, Alcott, had Joe get married, but not to Laurie.
Yeah, so Laurie struggles with his grandfather's expectations of him in a similar manner to the way Joe struggles with becoming a lady.
So they both are trying to find themselves in a way. Laurie is apparently not manly enough for his grandfather because he does not want to enter the business world.
And apparently Joe is not feminine enough for her sisters because she swears, soils her gloves, and speaks her mind at all times. So we could say a modern, tomboy and modern type of woman.
Who do you prefer, by the way?
I don't know, it's difficult. They are both beautiful in some ways.
Here's a question to the audience. In what ways were Joe, the protagonist, similar to the writer Louisa Alcott?
Joe was not romantic in the story, and neither was Alcott in real life. Joe was also critical of the limitations put on women, and the writer was the same way.
Very good answer. So basically, Joe is the author in the book.
Exactly, and many authors use this technique to show their own characteristics.
And their own preferences and so on.
Maybe because they know themselves pretty well, and that would help to create a better character, a more realistic one. Who knows?
Okay, Ms. Maka, let's go on to the setting.
Yeah.
The where and the when. I'll begin with the when. It was set during the Civil War, roughly 1861 to 1876. So, I mean, post-Civil War, during and post-Civil War. And a key factor is poverty. And maybe looking at the way Alcott lived her life, she was forced to do a lot of jobs, such as being a seamstress, a governess, a domestic helper, and many other things, as well as being a writer. And her family was the same way. Her sisters had to do a lot of different work to help the family, while the mother took on social work amongst Irish immigrants.
Yeah, and maybe that's why Alcott is quoted as saying, "I wish I was rich, I was good, and we were all a happy family these days. And I was driven in life not to be poor." So this was a hard time for her, maybe.
Difficult time in American, especially in that area, Massachusetts, Concord.
Yeah.
Now, what about the place? It was a small New England town. In 1847, she and the family had served as station masters on the Underground Railroad. This, I'm not sure if you know, it's related to abolitionism. This is when they used to let black slaves escape and go up to Canada using the Underground Railroad. And they helped hide a slave for a week, and this was part of her history.
Yeah, and Alcott read and admired the Declaration of Sentiments. This was published by the Seneca Falls Convention on Women's Rights, advocating for women's suffrage, and became the first woman to register to vote in Concord, Massachusetts, in a school board election. So this is a very progressive era, like time.
Progressive woman.
Woman also, exactly.
She herself.
The time itself is something that where lots of things are happening and changing.
So there's a lot of injustices, but there's also people who are trying to fight it.
Exactly.
However, Alcott's portrayal, even inspired by her family, which is what we're trying to say, the setting is based off of Alcott's personal situation, is an idealized one. For example, Mr. March is portrayed as a hero of the American Civil War, but of course that wasn't maybe the case in real life. And the March family is portrayed living in genteel poverty. This is this, as we mentioned, it's not very poor, but poor enough. But the Alcott family, dependent on impractical father, suffered real poverty and occasional hunger. So they were really poor. But the March family wasn't that poor. So
she made it a bit easier on her characters.
Maybe to focus more on the story.
Yeah. So now I think it is time to ask a question to our audience. So what do you think the effects of using poverty to show hardship in a novel are?
I think that placing main characters in poverty can be very effective in showing real conflicts and limitations on the characters that they must overcome through some inner personality traits.
Wow, great answer.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Darrell, what's our next part?
The next part is the main themes. The next, we have a few main themes to talk about. One is the necessity of work. The necessity of work, that will be the first one. Now, over the course of Little Women, and of course, Part 2, Good Wives, the March sisters try to find happiness through daily activities, their dreams, and each other. But when they do not engage in any productive work, they end up guilty and remorseful.
Yeah, and also being very interested in better dressing, also neglecting chores or getting revenge, girls end up to be unhappy. The only way they find meaningful happiness is when they are working, either for a living or for the benefit of their families.
So this book really is supporting the work ethic, working hard.
Especially with girls.
And that was a key feature of that small town that they lived in, that area they lived in. It was a Puritan area. They believed very much a religious Puritan era, and they believed in hard work as a kind of salvation.
Of course, and making you a better person. Yeah. Mr. Darrell, our next topic is the importance of being genuine. So Good Wives takes great pain to teach a lesson about the importance of being genuine. To make this point, Alcott actually contrasts the Marches with the more well-to-do young women like Emmy Moffat and Sally Gardiner.
She seems to emphasize the importance of paying close attention to the inner spiritual life and strength, as opposed to other things outside yourself, such as wealth or popularity and those kinds of things. And this philosophy is put into this book, Good Wives.
Yeah, and for instance, we can see Meg and Amy constantly struggle with vanity, and Amy turns down Fred's offer, although he is quite rich, but she does not really love him. So this shows a genuine attitude to their own life and to other people as well.
Mm-hmm. And in the book, really, what happens is they all learn, all these sisters learn to be happy with basically with what they have, and not to go after meaningless riches or popularity. The Marches' nice warm house in New England is presented as more desirable than even the mansions of Paris.
Mm-hmm. And this theme is particularly American, especially distinctive of New England. Unlike their counterpart in Europe, many middle-class Americans at that time, they didn't really mind being from the humble families and not having some kind of titles or other superficial trappings of wealth.
Basically to wrap up that point, these Americans wanted only what they thought they deserved and believed that they deserved based on how hard they worked.
Mm-hmm. So I think it is time for a question, Mr. Darrell.
Indeed, here's our question to the audience. Why was Alcott so concerned with having characters that were genuine in her story?
I think it has to do with her personality. She hates injustice in the world around her, so the writer had to create a fictional world that duplicated that belief of hers.
Well done. That's exactly what we wanted to show from our little main theme.
Yeah, exactly. Very nice. Thank you very much. And now, could you please give us some homework?
Yeah, we're hoping this might be a little fun. We'd like you to write a summary of a third novel, now, a third part, entitled Great Grandmothers.
Ooh.
And use the remaining sisters to show how you think they would have been in old age, what they've achieved, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. დაწერეთ შინაარსი მესამე რომანისთვის, სახელწოდებით The Great Grandmothers.
შესანიშნავი ბებიები.
Wow, Mr. Darrell, well done. That's really nice. პერსონაჟებად გამოიყენეთ დანარჩენი დებიც და გვაჩვენეთ როგორი იქნებოდნენ ისინი ხანდაზმულ ასაკში.
And they can send those answers to the address you see on the screen now.
დავალებები შეგიძლიათ გამოაგზავნოთ ეკრანზე მითითებულ მისამართზე.
Well, I want to thank the audience
for their interesting answers. Thank you, TV audience, for watching us.
And thank you, Ms. Maka, for
you too.
Always being such a great speaker.
Thank you very much, you too. And now let's say goodbye together.
All right.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Goodbye.